Etta James saw Aretha Franklin standing in the wings and had about 2 seconds to decide: finish the song or acknowledge the one person in the building whose voice could match hers. She was 3 verses in. The band was behind her, locked into the groove, the kind of momentum that a live performance builds when everything is working and the room is with you. The audience had given themselves over to the night, the particular surrender of a crowd that has stopped thinking and started feeling. It was, by any measure, a good show. It was the kind of show Etta James could produce when she was fully present, when the distance between her and the song had closed and something real was coming through. And then she looked to her left, and there was Aretha Franklin. To understand what that moment meant, it helps to understand what Aretha Franklin's presence in a room meant to the people who worked in the world of soul and R&B in the early 1960s. Aretha was not yet the figure she would become by the end of the decade, not yet the queen of soul, not yet the voice that would define an era. She was still building, still finding the specific place in American music where her talent could fully land. But the people who worked alongside her, who heard her in rehearsal rooms and church halls and recording studios, already knew. They knew the way musicians know things before the rest of the world catches up, through direct contact with something that cannot be explained away or rationalized or reduced to technique. Aretha Franklin had a voice that made other singers reconsider their relationship with their own. For Etta James, that relationship was complicated. Etta and Aretha occupied the same world for years, the same circuit, the same industry, the same narrow category that the music business had constructed for black female singers who didn't fit cleanly into pop or gospel or jazz. They were compared constantly by critics, by promoters, by audiences who had seen one and wanted to understand her in relation to the other. The comparisons were rarely kind to either woman, because comparisons rarely are. They tend to flatten the thing they're trying to describe. And what Etta James and Aretha Franklin were doing could not be flattened. What they shared was a capacity for the kind of singing that costs something. The kind that doesn't leave the performer exactly where she started, that takes something from the body and the spirit every time it's done fully, and that cannot be done fully without accepting that cost. Both women paid it, in their different ways, and both women's voices carried the evidence of that payment in a way that was audible to anyone who knew how to listen. What they didn't share was the way they carried it. Etta's voice was rough at the edges in a way that Aretha's was not. More overtly blues, more willing to sacrifice beauty for truth at a given moment. Less interested in the kind of technical perfection that could sometimes put a glass wall between a singer and her audience. Etta moved toward the rawness. She found safety in it, the safety of a woman who had learned that the most dangerous thing she could do on stage was try to control what her voice was actually saying. Aretha's approach was different, more architectural, more controlled in the way a master builder controls a structure, not to limit it, but to let it go as high as it could go without collapsing. Her precision was not distance. It was a different kind of honesty, the kind that comes from someone who has understood her instrument completely and chooses, deliberately, what to do with that understanding. The press didn't make these distinctions. The press compared them the way the press compares women in the same field, by ranking them, by placing one above the other, by framing their shared category as a competition with a winner. Etta had read those comparisons. She had spent years forming opinions about them, opinions she kept largely to herself in public and expressed more directly in private. She was not a woman who pretended not to have feelings about the way she was discussed. But feelings and respect are not the same thing. And whatever Etta James felt about the comparisons, what she felt about Aretha Franklin's voice was something closer to the feeling B.B. King had standing in the wings on the night he heard At Last. The recognition of something real, offered without negotiation. She was 3 verses into the song when she looked to her left. Aretha was standing just inside the wing, partly in shadow, not trying to be seen. She had come that night the way musicians sometimes come to other musicians' shows, not as a formal visit, not announced, just present, the way people who love music show up when they want to be inside it for a while, without having to perform it. She was watching Etta with the attention that Etta recognized, because it was the same attention she gave when she stood in the wings and listened to someone doing something real. 2 seconds. Etta could finish the verse. The band would carry her through it. The momentum of the night would hold, and Aretha would remain in the shadow where she had placed herself, and most of the audience would never know she had been there. That was the professional thing. That was the thing that protected the show, protected the energy in the room, kept the night on the track it was already running on. Or she could stop. Etta James stopped. She didn't stop the way performers stop when something goes wrong. No apology, no visible discomfort, no reaching for an explanation. She simply stepped back from the microphone, turned toward the wing, and gestured toward Aretha Franklin with the particular ease of someone who has decided in 2 seconds that the right thing to do is also the only thing to do. The band trailed off, instrument by instrument, the way bands do when the singer has departed without warning. The audience, which had been inside the music a moment before, came back to the surface. There was the brief, disorienting silence of a crowd trying to understand what has changed and why. A few people near the front followed Etta's gesture toward the wing and began to understand before the others. And then Etta said Aretha's name, not loudly, not as an announcement, more in the manner of an introduction between friends, and the room understood all at once. What followed was not a dramatic scene. Aretha did not come on stage. She did not sing. She raised a hand from the shadow of the wing in acknowledgement. Something between a wave and a bow. The gesture of someone who had not come to be seen and was receiving the attention with grace rather than comfort. The audience gave her what audiences give when they recognize greatness unexpectedly. Something louder and more genuine than the applause they had been offering all night, because it was unplanned, because neither the performer nor the artist in the wings had asked for it. And then Etta turned back to the microphone, nodded to the band, and finished the song. The room she finished it in was different from the room she had started in. Not dramatically different, the same people, the same seats, the same stage. But the temperature had changed. Something had been declared without words that the audience had witnessed and would carry with them. Etta James had stopped a good show to acknowledge someone whose voice she respected more than the momentum of the night. And she had done it without calculation, without the careful management of image that governed most decisions in that world. She had simply looked to her left, seen Aretha Franklin, and told the truth about what she saw. In the years that followed, the story circulated in the way stories circulate among musicians. Not in the press, not in interviews, but in dressing rooms and tour buses and the side conversations of people who had been there or had heard from someone who had. It became one of those anecdotes that musicians tell not as gossip, but as evidence. Evidence of something about Etta James that the public version of her story sometimes missed. The public version of Etta James was complicated by the very things that made her extraordinary: the roughness, the difficulty, the years of struggle that her voice carried so audibly. She was not an easy figure to celebrate cleanly. Her life resisted the kind of simple narrative that made for straightforward admiration. But the musicians who worked alongside her remembered things like this night. Moments when the difficulty fell away and what was left was simply a woman who knew what mattered and acted on it without hesitation. Who stopped a good show in its tracks because someone whose voice deserved acknowledgement was standing in the dark at the edge of the stage. Aretha Franklin, in later years, spoke about Etta James with the kind of specificity that signals genuine feeling rather than professional courtesy. She spoke about Etta's voice as something that had shaped her own understanding of what a voice could carry. She spoke about Etta's rawness, not as a limitation, but as a form of courage. The courage to let the song cost what it actually costs, without softening the invoice. Whether she remembered that particular night, or whether it was one of many nights between two singers who shared a world for decades, is harder to say. What can be said is that the gesture Etta made, stepping back from the microphone, turning toward the wing, saying a name, was the kind of gesture that stays with the person it's offered to. It says, "I see you." It says, "What you do matters." It says, "The competition the world insists on between us has nothing to do with how I hear your voice." It took Etta James 2 seconds to decide. She had been making decisions like that her entire life. Quick, instinctive, rarely second-guessed. Most of them happened in private, in rooms that left no record. This one happened on stage, in front of an audience, with a band trailing off behind her and a woman in the wings who had not come to be seen. The song finished. The night moved on. And somewhere in the shadow of the wing, Aretha Franklin watched Etta James return to the microphone and understood something about her that no review had ever quite captured.